Well, all right. Welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation, Bridging the Gap with Rex
and Eva.
And we are so excited. It is election week.
Ooh,
we are 40.
I get to participate this year.
You do. That's a big deal. Congratulations. 18-year-old, the first time to vote. I would love to tell you that I had this deep spiritual experience the first time I voted, but I simply do not remember. It would have been in...
You were 18 in 78.
Yeah, 78. And so my first presidential election would have
Not
been...
in 78.
It would have been 80. So maybe that's why I don't remember, because I didn't immediately vote.
Well, because you had to mail in.
Like you are.
Yeah.
Well, you are immediately, you just turned 18 and you get to participate in a presidential election less than 3 weeks later.
And you also mailed in, didn't you?
No, we actually went to a polling place.
You did? Because you were in college.
Yeah, but you still voted in the county that you...
Oh, really?
Yeah, back then it was...
Because now most college kids have to mail their stuff back home if they're not in their county.
Yes. I don't recall that it worked that way back then.
Okay.
I think you actually voted in the county that you attended college because you were considered a resident at that point. So anyhow, that's very unusual, Eva, the fact that you just turned 18, you immediately get to vote, and not only vote, but vote in a presidential election, a once every 4-year event.
Well,
what does that feel like?
It's exciting because now I'm getting to have a say in what my future looks like and getting to be an active participant and advocate for it. And it's now getting to make decisions that not only will benefit me, but my future and my children in the future and all of those fun things. So I'm excited.
Good. Well, I know you are. And it's been kind of interesting because we've even had some difficult conversations here in the house between your mom and you.
The conversation we had at lunch today was not a difficult conversation. We were just communicating in a way you don't like.
Well, because when you two choose to debate each other,
it gets passionate.
The voices get raised a little bit.
You think we're arguing. We're just passionately talking to each other.
I have learned that, but it's a little disconcerting, and maybe I'm a little oversensitive to that because I'm hypersensitive to the arguing between the two political parties, and maybe
and see, we both agree with the same things. We just within our own beliefs we have some different viewpoints. Like we discussed today, but by the time we got done discussing it, we both had come to a conclusion that we could agree with. Yeah,
and I actually enjoyed listening to the two of you debate each other, the tension, the passion, the counter arguments. What?
You just look so checked out at lunch. So you enjoyed that? To a degree. That's fair. I'll give you that.
Because I'm trying to sit there and I'm listening to this back and forth. It's like watching a tennis match. And I'm like, okay, which one of these individuals is going to be able to move the ball down the field, so to speak? And are we going to be able to come to any resolution? And by the way, that is part of political discourse, is that at some point we have to come to a resolution.
There is no agreeing
for the
to
problem.
Disagree. Well, it's agreeing to disagree sometimes, but there's no just dropping it or each group being completely happy with both of it, because that's the reason we have different parties, is because it allows people to have different beliefs and be able to stand with them. Essentially, if we all believed the same thing, what's the point of different parties?
Right. And I like to say it like this: we can disagree. Matter of fact, that's what makes the two-party system viable. But I think we should respectfully disagree. And again, I am... Why are you laughing?
The running joke right now is, why can't the potential vice presidents be the ones running for president? Because they can respectfully disagree with each other without all the insults. And they show empathy at the debate for each other, and agreement and agreeing to disagree. And you actually have a great point. I agree on this too. Insert how they would individually approach it, different things. That's what I feel like. I feel like what our vice presidential debate looked like was what I feel like when you see old clips of old presidential debates from 40, 50 years ago. That's what the presidential debate looked like.
Exactly.
Whereas now it becomes whoever is the most out there is the one that gets the most TikTok attention, really.
Right. And I don't know that there's a name for it. I call it attack politics. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is a verbal attack on your opponent. And you're right. 40, 50 years ago, it just was not that way. Matter of fact, I'll give you a little bit of history. In the 1992 presidential election, I believe it was. Yeah, 92. That was George W. Bush. No, I'm sorry. George Bush the elder and Bill Clinton. And that was Bill Clinton's first run at the presidency. And the polls kept becoming tighter and tighter the closer it got to election. And George Bush the elder had a perfect setup from a political standpoint. He was very popular. He had served with Ronald Reagan for 8 years as his vice president. Reagan was popular, left office with a high approval rating. We had just come back from the first Gulf War, victorious. Everything was just in great shape. The economy was in great shape. So it was almost like you were handing George Bush the elder a second term on a platter. But all of a sudden, the polls began to close in terms of the numbers. And in some states, Clinton started going ahead. And I will never forget this. George Bush the elder, who was a very diplomatic person. He had served as an ambassador, if I recall correctly. He had also been a CIA director. He was probably the most qualified from a resume standpoint, probably one of the most, if not the most qualified presidents we ever had. But I'll never forget this. During a rally that he did, he was so upset that the polls were beginning to show Clinton gaining on him and surpassing him in some states, that he said something to the effect, "I cannot believe that you're going to take this bozo seriously." People were appalled. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how that just was a common part of our debate. Yeah.
Exactly. That's one word. It's name calling.
Yeah.
He name called his opponent one thing, basically called him a clown. For those that don't remember, Bozo the Clown.
Yep.
He said, "I can't believe you're going to take this bozo seriously." And he caught an unbelievable amount of grief for that in 1992. One word, one name calling segment.
And that was only 24 years ago. No,
it was
34 years ago.
Well, yeah, 34 years ago. So
I'm great at math.
Yeah, are we doing our math right? This is 2024, 24 and 8, 32. 32 years ago.
You said 1990.
92, 8, and 24.
Yeah,
32.
you're right. You're so right.
Just stay with me on the math.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day. But the point is, I remember that and how appalled people were. And as I look back on that, I'm not telling you that's why he lost the election, but to a degree, there were some segments of people that lost respect for him because he lost his temper in public. He said it in a rally and he name called his opponent. Now, fast forward 32 years, and I'm like, are you kidding me? And again, this is my framework, Eva. You really have no frame of reference in what I'm talking about.
The first debate I remember is the 2016 debate, and that was chaotic.
That was extremely chaotic. So, first-time voter, welcome to politics. Welcome to a different landscape than what I grew up with. But evidently, this is the way we're going to roll now. Now, it's not the way I'm going to roll. I'm never going to name call people. I'm just not going to be divisive, that type of thing. But, and some of it is rhetoric. You just got to realize, hey, this is the political climate. A lot of it is chatter, it's rhetoric, and you have to filter through that.
But we shouldn't use rhetoric as a bad term, like it's used in modern language, because I am a student of rhetoric. That is literally what it's called. It just means you're learning the art of speaking, of how you it's the way you speak and how you present your facts. And if the rhetoric has taken a bad turn, that's not the whole thing. Because I remember in the presidential debate, Vice President Harris, she she used it negatively, talking about it. And I was like, that's not the meaning of the word in the traditional sense. When the great thought minds of the classical era, Aristotle,
Yes.
Augustine, they were rhetoricians or whatever. They were teaching people how to think.
Exactly.
Not telling them what to think, but how to think. And
Exactly.
so we have to remember that it's just the tone of the rhetoric has changed. Sorry, that's like a personal vendetta.
I get it, but that's great. That's a great point.
Because I don't want my education to be devalued because the term we're defined by is now negatively viewed in the light.
Eva, we could go down a whole pig trail on terminology and what people
I'm just
have
defining it.
I know you are, but I love it.
Part of rhetoric is defining your terms.
I love it.
I'm defining that.
You are, and I love the fact that you're defining it positively. And so instead of what word should I use? I called it
the
chatter.
Conversation, the tone,
the dialogue, the tone.
the tone, the attitude of way we're approaching things.
So it's just different, and so and I would say this too. It's difficult. It's difficult to govern a country. It is difficult to come to a consent when we are as divided as apparently we are as a country.
We are very divided. At least in my generation,
it's kind of this 50-50 deal, and so. It's just it's a frustrating time.
It is very frustrating.
Okay. So what other observations do you have along that line from a standpoint of maybe a first time voter, other than the conversation, the dialogue, the tone? Let me ask you this. What issues are really important to 18-year-olds at this point? What do you think is the main issue in the election? I know what the polls are saying. The economy is a big one. Yeah.
Like in the election as itself, or what we're going to get out of the election, like what we're hoping to get out of it?
No, the main issue in terms of what people think is the priority. What's closer to what concern? Well, that's what I'm trying to say. What's the priority?
My generation, we control the media, right? We're the ones that dictate the trends. We're the ones that dictate whether you're relevant or not. And so far, we find the whole political climate an absolute mess. It is a joke. We make it a joke. We understand that it's a serious matter, but even the people in it, I don't feel like treat it as seriously as they should be. And they allow themselves, they don't have the self-control to allow themselves from speaking out and making a joke of themselves. Both parties are doing it. And it's frustrating because we like to put people on pedestals who deserve it, right? Right? That's just something my generation has always done. We like to highlight people who are making a difference, and we like to poke fun at people who aren't. And I can just tell you now, neither one of our political candidates that are, they're not on pedestals, right? We're voting we're making a decision because we have to, not because we necessarily want to. And I feel like the big problem is they talk a lot of talk, but they don't reflect it in their actions. Both parties, they say a lot of things they don't ever actually do. And I think we're all scared they're going to make a bunch of promises, and we're going to vote for whoever it is we're voting for, and they're never going to follow through with it. And we're going to have elected someone into power for 4 years who's not going to do anything that benefits the people, but benefits their own agenda, and benefits only a population of the agenda, or only a portion of the population, not everybody as a whole. And there's a lot of misinformation that is causing a lot of confusion, a lot of slandering, a lot of this. And so I just think, personally, my biggest concern is that there's a lot not being said about what people's policies and beliefs are, and we don't have the full picture before we vote for them, and the election is in 2 days.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I get it. That's frustrating.
Because
right?
I just mean, look at the commercials that come on during football games, right? So millions of people are watching Sunday Night Football. Well, a lot of these commercials are just slandering the other political party, right? It's not talking about what your beliefs are. It's just attacking the other person. It's making false claims that the other party has denied. It's making speculation and all of these things. And it's just, all it's doing is fueling a fire that's causing people to argue, rather than saying, this is what I believe. This is what the other person believes. There you go. It's like you have to go through a corn maze to figure out what each party's individual policies are.
Interesting.
Sorry,
Okay.
that's like a long way of saying it's just it's not clear. It's a joke because they're making a joke of themselves, and there is no clear path for us. We're having to go under and over and deciphering what is personal bias versus actual fact.
Yeah. I'm going to say it a different way.
Please do.
What I think you just said, and your mother knows this is a contentious point with me. In a president, I am looking at the party. Matter of fact, I was on both parties' websites last night, just looking over platforms and components and different things that were addressed. But first and foremost, I am looking for a leader, especially that's running for the office of president. I would like for you to act presidential.
Yes.
That's the way I would say it. And I don't see that.
Who would be a model president that they could model themselves after? Who would you say was a presidential president?
Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
I mean, but you already know I'm prejudiced. I had lunch in the White House with Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
But Reagan left office with a 69% approval rating. Let's go ahead and round that off. That's 7 out of 10 Americans approved of Ronald Reagan after him being in office for 8 years.
Yep.
That's popular, but a lot of it was Reagan acted presidential. We know his nickname was the Great Communicator.
Yeah.
He was very positive. He was very uplifting. He was very optimistic. He believed in the power of the American people to problem solve, to come together. And he just exhibited this sense of enthusiasm and optimism for the direction of the country. And he's not the only one. Dwight Eisenhower is probably one of our most respected presidents. The Supreme Allied Commander, commanded our forces in World War II, and then came back and decided to run for president.
Yep.
And I think he carried a lot of weight. But I think every president carried themselves in a presidential manner until recently. There's just been this shift, and I'm not going to blame it on, it'd be real easy for me to blame it on one person. I'm not going to do that. I think that it is indicative of our culture.
Well, I want to blame it on social media.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think like I said, we like to put people on pedestals for actually doing something, right?
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a good
And
thing.
when you say we, you said we.
My generation.
All right.
Like I said, we control the media. Yes, the Gen Z control the media, right?
Really?
I would 100% agree. Because we're the ones that dictate what songs are popular. We're the most culturally online generation, right?
Okay.
We get our news from social media.
I'll give you that.
We dictate the trend. The ratings of a movie are dictated on whether social media is giving it a good opinion.
Okay.
It's our form of communication.
Okay.
Our entire lives revolve around our social media.
Yep.
Right? I spend more time on that app than I do any other app.
Yep.
And so when I say we control it, I don't mean we control it, but it's our voice makes the most difference.
Right.
And
you're making the biggest splash.
Yes, we are.
In public opinion.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
in
we're
trends.
and because we're the first generation that are digital natives.
Yep.
Right. And so, loosely millennial generation, they've kind of adapted with us, but either way, Gen Z is just we're the most active generation on social media.
Yep.
And so when social media started getting really big outside of Facebook, because that originally was just a communication platform, and it's now just become a place for people to talk and sell things. But on these platforms, and specifically when reels and short form content became really popular, the more outlandish someone is, the more they trend, right? The more different they are, the more they stand out, the more they trend. And if they trend, people start copying that trend. They start quoting that trend. They start acting that way. And so when our presidents, which I think I know who you're talking about, started becoming a little more...
Yeah, let me go ahead and say it, because one of our pet peeves in our private conversations is that people they beat around the bush too much and they don't say what they mean. Let me go ahead and say it. It's Donald J. Trump.
And it's
I do not,
the 2016 election. That's why I know about it. It's because I grew up sitting at the lunch table. Right? I'm in 2016? I'm 10 years old, right? We are sitting at the lunch table talking about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, right? No 10-year-olds should really know this much about what's going on in the political climate. But it was everywhere because social media was pushing it at us. Everybody was making jokes about it. Trump or Clinton would say something really funny and we'd start quoting it. And so the more marketable the president has become, the more they do better in the younger generations. And here's a statistic. Only 53% of Gen Z people have confirmed that they will be voting.
Only 53%.
Of eligible
Yep.
Gen Z people have confirmed. So have already registered. Said, yes, I am voting, which is a low number. And we get stereotyped. That's the problem. Gen Z gets stereotyped very heavily into we're aloof and don't care about our political. We are some of the most outspoken people. We just do it on social media. Well, we are the dominant culture on social media. And so we aren't sitting at in a restaurant like you frequently see at the breakfast place you go to talking about it with friends. That's not what we are. We talk about it in the comment sections of Reels where one of the political candidates says something we disagree with. That's where we're outspoken. And the more people interact with that, the more it trends, the more people learn about it, the more people hear it. And so these candidates have been allowed to act less presidential because it gets the younger people involved and gets their vote.
That's interesting. And I think you're right because I saw several different articles this week that just talked about visibility, marketing, branding.
Trump is doing
messaging.
A fantastic job remaining marketable to the younger generation, going and working at McDonald's, right? Nobody would really care that he did that, but it trended. It was everywhere. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was posting it, right? People are now listening to him because of what he did there. People now are becoming active because they're like, well, what was the point of him doing that? And then they go and research him and they go, actually, I agree with this some here, or I completely disagree with it here. And it's getting people involved. And so the more marketable these people have become, the more involved the younger generations are becoming.
That's interesting. And it just goes back to something you and I have been talking about, in our in-home conversations, how difficult these subjects are because of the changing environment. I see things from, here I am talking about, George Bush calling Clinton a name 32 years ago. And I have framed my viewpoint of presidential candidates with a certain amount of grace, dignity, honor, respect, and the way they even treat their opponents. And then it's just not that way anymore. And so I think we construct these points of views that age, they get dated. And it's one of the reasons that you and I have been able to communicate because I try to accept the things that you're telling me and how points of view are changing. And I think your mother said this today, and I love this analogy. I don't know if she shared, I think she told you, and then she told me, she said, hey, when you're talking to your dad, it's like an aircraft carrier. It doesn't
She used
turn.
a different analogy with me.
She used Disney cruise
she
ship,
said
right?
he was a pontoon. She hasn't been around as long. Well, a pontoon can turn on a dime, but it takes a cruise ship a long while to turn and make change in something. And we can turn on a dime, and we get over the smaller waves better. Whereas the cruise ships, it takes them longer to turn and adapt to the change, but they've been around long enough that they can handle the bigger waves and the bigger changes in the world. And so that was a good analogy.
I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And
she
I
compared
think
you to the cruise ship, me to
exactly
the pontoon.
Right. And I think that is extremely insightful. That's a great visual. And with that, we have to give each other a lot of grace. Yep. And again, that's the whole topic of our podcast, generation to generation. No.
Oh, go ahead.
So you have a question.
I have a question for you.
Okay. All right. Bring it.
How do you view my generation in this day and age?
In this day and age?
In this day and age, as of today, as of November 3rd of 2024, how do you view my generation? What is your opinion of them?
Okay,
be brutally honest.
Okay, well, I've told you this before. I am encouraged by your generation. I am inspired by your generation And I do not think you're lazy. You know, I know that's the
stereotype.
That's a stereotype that a lot of people tag on you guys, and I don't even know where that comes from. I think it's what we just talked about. It's this construct and it's this point of view. A lot of people in my generation, we worked with our hands, especially when we were teenagers. You guys don't do that anymore. Well, it's a change in environment. It's not that you wouldn't be willing to work with your hands.
We're just finding different ways to do it.
That's exactly right.
I saw this fantastic quote. I'm sorry, and I'll let you get back to it. But speaking of that, it said, give the hardest job to the laziest person and they'll find the easiest way to do it. And I think that's a brilliant analogy for our generation. We're taking on a lot of hard challenges and we're not necessarily lazy. We just genuinely don't want to repeat the same lives that our parents did of working, 9 to 5 at a job they don't quite like for 50 years and then retiring and barely having enough to do anything with your life. And so we're finding different ways to do it. And I think the older generations don't necessarily know what to do with that. And so we get labeled lazy. But
yeah,
I think I think that quote came specifically from this general climate.
Yeah.
So
and again, that characterization, again, that's a label. That's another premise of our podcast. Let's quit putting labels on people, on generations, even on political parties. I'm sick of the labels, and I'll talk about that in a moment. If you vote Republican, there's a certain label that's going to be placed on you.
100%.
If you vote Democratic, there's a certain label that's going to be placed on you.
But when the parties were originally created, they actually were flipped.
They were exactly flipped, which is nuts. But let me finish answering the question. It's when I think of your generation, and I have a little bit of a skewed viewpoint possibly because I feel like I get to be with some of the best of the best. I'm associated with a college here in town, and the more that I am around those particular students, the more I am impressed with their insight, with their energy, their enthusiasm, their optimism, the relevance of their questions. These young people ask extremely good questions, and I love it. It tells me they're insightful. They are thinking about the future. They're thinking about practical application. So again, I'm very encouraged by your generation. Now, I will say, because you asked the question, what do I think? The one, and I don't even want to call it a downfall, but the one concern I have for your generation, and again, this is a point of view, I don't know that you've been presented with enough hard things. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
People, you develop your character. The Bible says this, you develop your character through perseverance. And so it takes difficult circumstances.
What would you define difficult circumstances, though? Because I personally think we're having to go through a lot. It's just different than how your generation would define hard work.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah.
As a soldier, you asked me today, what's so special about Veterans Day? We're most likely going to talk about Veterans Day for next week's podcast since it's coming up. Well, my answer to that would be, first and foremost, veterans do hard things that not everyone is willing to do. What do I mean by that? It's too muddy today. There's 18 inches of mud between here and that 200 yards that I need to get to. For a soldier, it doesn't matter how deep the mud is, how nasty it is, how much water it has in it. If I have to crawl through 18 inches of mud, 200 yards, I'm going to do it. That's hard. And it's even harder if it's 28 degrees outside.
Yep.
The mud's not only nasty, it's not only wet, it's not only deep, it's cold. That's hard.
Yep.
A soldier's willing to do that. And he's willing to do it on behalf of the citizens of this country.
Yep.
I could give other examples, again, because I was one. I have been through extremely hard things physically, emotionally, mentally. And so my concern for your generations are molded by the difficult things they go through. Paul, your grandfather, his generation at 18 years old, he went off to World War II. His generation was molded by that conflict. My generation was molded by basically Vietnam and the body bags and what was coming.
You don't think my generation's being molded by the fact that we can't afford to live?
I do, and so I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So again, it's point of view. I tend, and I think people my age, we tend to think about hard and perseverance in terms of physical endurance.
Yep.
What have you been able to endure physically? Well, your generation, in my opinion, has not had to go through a lot of
'cause
things difficult physically.
The previous generations
but-
did a lot of work to make sure we wouldn't, to make the country better for their children.
Precisely.
But now we're living with the costs of what it takes to make the country better.
Yes, and so that was the conversation today with your mother that I enjoyed so much.
I'll give you.
Give us an overview of that.
For an hour and a half about minimum wage and what the consequences and benefits of raising it would be. And we came to an agreement. We're fine with there being no taxation on tips, but we had come to the conclusion that the only way for minimum wage to be raised, because minimum wage has not been raised in like 16, 17 years, but the cost of living has gone up. The only way for minimum wage to actually benefit people is if the cost of living goes down, because otherwise all it does is make the cost of living go up. You can raise the price, but all it does is raise the price everywhere. So that was the conclusion we came to. We talked about that, but it took an hour and a half to get there.
Yeah. And I actually enjoyed listening to you guys kind of battle that out a little bit. And
I think the people at the table next to us did too, because they were listening in and they were laughing and they were like, good point. And then they would talk about it some and then come back and listen.
But that's the essence of what we're talking about, Eva, is that we have to engage each other. And I know that this is probably a frustration point for you with me. We talked about this a little bit last episode. You are a feeler. I'm a thinker. Okay, I like to think things through.
Well, that doesn't mean I don't. I just have to guard my emotions more closely before I let them take control.
You do, and you process differently.
I do.
And I'm learning that. I like to, even for the podcast, even though we're not reading off a script right now, I have a ton of notes on my phone. And occasionally I look down to just kind of see, well, what kind of notes did I write? Whereas you don't.
I refuse to read your notes.
Yes, and you process verbally.
I do.
And I'm having to learn that hey, it's not that she's not interested in the preparation for the podcast, but she processes
You're not communicating
differently.
in a way I understand it.
Yeah, and so I've got to get better at that.
It's like it's coming to the understanding that in the specific instance, you can write your notes and all you want, rather than texting them to me, sitting down with me and explaining the bullet point versions of them and letting me ask a question and being like, wait, what does that mean? Like the electoral college or something, and you explaining it rather than sending a note and having the whole conversation written. Because that's not how I process things. I talk to myself. Oh my gosh, I talk to myself so much because that's how I process things. I narrate everything I do. I narrate everything I do because that's how I process. And so that it's very different from you. You're a silent processor and you start talking about it once you have a complete plan. And I talk about it A to B, and then I get silent once I have a plan.
Yeah, and that's what makes a team strong. And I think people forget that we think differently. Our approach to problem solving is different. I noticed that in you as a young child. I'm like, no, you didn't do anything the way I would have done it, but you had this ability to immediately see even mechanical components and kind of tear them apart, and you understood immediately how they worked. And just the way that you arrived at a solution, sometimes I thought, you know what? I would have never done it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more lockstep. I want it step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well,
I'm like step 7, step 2, step 1, step 5.
But you still come up with the right answer. And so
it used to bug you when we did math.
It did. and so, but the point is we tend to judge each other and say, well, that's not right. And especially I'm a C personality.
Yep.
There's a right way to do things. Well, yeah, but at the same time,
the right way doesn't mean there's only one way.
Exactly. And so you have shown me that, and I'm grateful for that, because you have you're very creative. You think differently, you solve problems differently, and you've helped me see that, hey, there is more than one way to approach a problem. And I wish, again, in this political environment that we're in as we enter the election, I've always said this, if your loyalty to a political party supersedes your loyalty to your country, you have a problem.
Yeah.
I'm not, my loyalty to a particular
to our country,
party.
and then to the politics of it, right?
Exactly.
It's not the other way around.
And then as a Christian, I carry it one step further. If your loyalty to America supersedes your loyalty to the kingdom of God, you also have a problem.
Well,
and a lot of people don't want to hear that, but I'm like, hey, God is the God of all nations,
Not just
and
America.
not just America. And so we tend, I'm going to say something, we tend to want to wrap the cross of Jesus Christ in red, white, and blue and stars.
But
Well, I
we're
got
free.
news
We
for
are a
you.
religiously free nation for a reason.
Well, that's a whole different topic.
Go ahead.
But the cross of Jesus is dipped in the blood of Jesus, red, not red, white, and blue. And so I think that we kind of skew our Christianity sometimes in this country. And again, that's a whole nother topic.
Yep.
So anyway,
I have more to say.
Okay, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Well, first off, I want to say what I think, because I asked you, what is your problem? What do your opinion of my generation? I want to tell you my opinion of your generation.
Do tell.
Oh, please. No, it's actually really nice. Your generation has put a lot of work to make sure that we have every option available to us, right? Your generation has been in charge of dictating what our future looks like for many, many, many years now. And that's absolutely fantastic because, we're not constantly and we're still in wars, but it's not as bad like the body bags on TV. I feel like you've given us every opportunity and every chance to succeed. And so I'm very grateful for that, your generation. But I feel like your generation gets hung up in the my way is the right way. And they like to label. They're just as bad at labeling people as my generation is, because they like to label our generation as lazy and as silent and as, I saw the term politically apathetic. And I think that's entirely untrue. I think we are some of the most outspoken generation. I just think we're talking about it in a different way that not a lot of the older generations want to hear or or choose to listen to, because we're talking on platforms they're not familiar with and they expect us to conform to their old ways, but we're never going back to the old ways. We're a nation of progress. And so that's the challenge, as always, with your generation, is that I feel like some people get so set in their ways because it worked for them. They don't want to take the steps forward to understand what future looks like.
Yep. And I think that's a valid point. And I think you're gracious in the way that you said that. Hey, we have tried to set you up.
Yeah.
We always want
we don't
the
have
generation.
as many physically hard challenges because your generation and the one right before us put a lot of work to make sure we didn't.
We did. But sometimes I feel like we cheat people when we make things too easy. And so that's my concern again. But you can't just look at it from a physical perspective. You guys are going to be faced, even in COVID, that wasn't just physical. No. That was emotional. That was mental. People had to navigate that. And so your generation did that. It impacted your schoolwork. There's a lot of things that we're still going to learn about that in the years to come. But again, I think you've been gracious in your assessment of my generation, but you've also been direct. And it's one of my pet peeves. You know this. As we age, I think we tend to get more set in our ways, but we also tend to get more irritated, more frustrated.
You become grouchy old people.
We become grouchy old people. And you know this. I've made a conscious decision. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want your friends to look at me and go, well, Eva's dad, he's that guy. If you go over there, you're going to have to listen to our dissertation about, and I'm going to say this because it's biblical. Ecclesiastes says specifically don't do that. It's, to your point, it says, hey, quit talking about the good old days because they're not coming back. The day you've been given is today. So let's make the best of it. Today matters. And I love the fact that you and I are able to sit at a podcast and have this kind of conversation.
So I have a final question for you before I share my final viewpoint. If you had to give a message, right? Something for your generation, the older generations, right? Let's cover every generation above mine or below mine, below mine.
Anyone that's living.
Yeah. Right.
The boomers, the greatest generation.
To the Gen Z.
Yeah.
What would your advice be? What would your advice? What would your wisdom? What would your words be? What are you going to say to them? what do you have to say about this topic of politics and the presidential debate and all of these exciting things happening this week?
That's a great question, and
I asked it poorly. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't even know that I can answer that in one sentence.
Not one sentence.
Or even a paragraph. It goes back to the premise of this podcast. Let's quit labeling each other. Mm-hmm. Let's quit drawing incorrect conclusions. And I'm going to say this, and I thought we might get into a little bit of political analysis on this episode, but we're not. But I'm going to say this and answer your question. We have created, and again, not only social media, but mainstream media has created a lot of this divisive environment because
it's marketable.
It's marketable. It's clickbait.
Yep.
Hey, sell a product, sell the next thing, make it wild, make it crazy.
It's marketable.
And it's marketable. Mainstream media has created a lot of that. However, the public has to buy into that. And so we have created almost an untenable situation in our political dialogue and discourse, not only across the aisle politically, but across generations, which goes to your questions. If you vote, we're so polar opposite and so antagonistic toward each other. I'm just going to say it like it is. If you vote Republican, you're a racist. If you vote Democrat, you're a baby killer. You can't win when people put those kind of labels on each other. And so stop it. There's a lot more to the issue than just saying, well, you're a Republican, will you support racism? That's a insane statement. You don't even know me.
And you're invalidating an entire party's worth of beliefs by one specific thing you disagree with.
Precisely. And likewise, if you look at a Democrat and say, well, you're a baby killer. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. I am totally against abortion. And I could give you the scriptural reasons why. It violates my belief in what Scripture says. Just because it's a
political party's policy doesn't mean everybody under that political party agrees with it either.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take it one step further. Because you may subscribe to that particular aspect, I'm not going to call you a demon, and I'm not going to call you a godless heathen, because there's no way that you're going to have a political discourse with someone when you use that kind of language. Okay. Mm-hmm. So just if I vote Republican, hey, that doesn't make me a racist. If I happen to vote Democratic, I don't think it makes me a baby killer. And I think my point is don't take it out of context, folks. My point is you have to peel the onion back a little bit more to have a discourse with someone of the opposing political view. Hey, I don't understand how you could vote X. Would you please help me understand that?
It's like
I'd
my
love
education.
to get your point of view.
It's like my education. I attend a Christian school. I'm Christian myself. But we read the entire Quran in order to understand the Islamic beliefs and why they believe the way they do. Because if we had never done that, we would have just been saying, we're right, you're wrong. There's no middle ground. We actually both agree on this right here, right? Your beliefs and my beliefs co-align here. They both believe the same thing. However, I disagree with your belief on this. Would you like to hear why? And I would like to hear your reasoning. We don't have that. It's just a label, and it isolates everybody by having it.
Yeah.
There's no civility in it.
There's no civility in it whatsoever. There's no graciousness in it whatsoever. And I say it this way. I think I put this in my notes. That we've almost created this environment with the labels that if you're part of the other label, well, hey, you're wrong and I hate you automatically. There's no constructive discourse that's ever going to happen when we have those attitudes. Nope. So leading up to the election, we're going to encourage everybody to vote.
I have something to say.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to tell you this.
Okay, tell me.
No, what I would say to every generation, as someone who is young, right? It's vote, right? Mm-hmm. Vote in your primaries, vote in the midterms, every chance you get, because you can't complain about the state of our country if you don't actively try and have a say in it, right? And when I say have a say, I mean a vote, right? If you don't put your number and your opinion and your view on the ballot and submit that ballot, you have no right, really, I mean, to be able to say, Well, look at the state of everything because you were not an active participant in trying to change it, right? So vote, educate yourself. If everybody would just spend a little more time educating themselves on both parties' beliefs, right, we would be able to have more discussion. But we're all so ignorant in how we view things, and we get stuck in our ways. My pet peeve with the older generation, well, my generation does the same thing. We're stuck in our beliefs and we're not willing to hear anyone out. So hear each other out, have discussions with people you'll disagree with, because you're going to come to more of an understanding and to realize most people want America to be great, right?
Yep.
They want America to be better. They want America to flourish. Now, we have different views of what that means, but we all want to be able to afford to live. We all want to not have to pay as many taxes, and we want the school shootings to stop happening, and we want our citizens to be taken care of, and we want to make sure that Americans have the freedom we were promised in our Constitution, right, in our Bill of Rights. But we isolate ourselves based off some of the non-constitutional beliefs, and we stop fighting for our Constitution when we get hung up on the political parties' selling points like the abortion and racism labels. When we get hung up on those, we stop working as a country to protect our constitutional beliefs and rights.
Yeah, and
so that's what just vote, be active participants in it is what I want to say, because that gives you a chance to make change.
I think it's great. And since you brought that up, a reminder, especially for younger voters like you that are 18 going to the polls for the first time, you need to check the county website that you live in. For instance, we live in Shelby County, Alabama. You can go to shelbyal.com, and there is a sample ballot so that you can look. It's not just the president we're voting for.
It goes just as close to your own county.
Yes. For instance, in Alabama, we're voting for Supreme Court justices in November. We're voting for a constitutional amendment to the state constitution. There are several things. We're voting for the county probate judge. There are several other positions, and so you need to look at a sample ballot.
It's not just federal level.
Exactly, before you go to the polls. So be informed, to your point. Educate yourself, and let's not demonize the other side.
Because we're all Americans.
We're all Americans. And I will tell you this, I evaluate party platforms. I try not to pay as much attention to the individuals because of the circus, but I look at the platforms, and I do evaluate those platforms in context of my world view. Yep. And my worldview is a biblical worldview. And if I see things that particular party promotes that are in direct opposition to what I believe as a Christian, I believe it is my duty to not support that platform. Yep. And we're going to leave it at that. But Eva, I have enjoyed hanging out with you on this podcast episode. We're 48 hours out. So go vote and...
let's see change, right?
Well, there's going to be change one way or the other. But hey, let's be the change. That's another quote. Let's be the change that we desire to see.
Absolutely.
If we're tired of the divisiveness and the discord and the strife and all of these things, we can't go out and participate individually.
But
we've got to be the ones that speak
from it
with
because
truth
we
and
disagree.
Grace.
And so we have to remember, educate yourselves, and remember to always be able to talk. I know I'm like cutting you out of that, but we have to remember to always be able to talk to each other, because at the heart of it all, we're all Americans. And I know we're isolating our audience outside of the States, but this is a massive deal for our future, and it affects the world globally, because we're the currency, right? We use the US dollar, all those things. And so I apologize for that, but we got to remember, no matter where you come from, right? The nation you live in, you are a part of that nation. And you have to remember the most important thing is being able to talk to the people of it, because you're never going to get anywhere if you just run from it and hide and label yourself off. And so just always be able to talk with each other. That's the whole premise of our podcast, is being able to talk. And it goes beyond father-daughter relationships and parent and child. It's talk to your family, talk to your coworkers. Just don't be running from it because you're scared of the discourse, because if you approach it civilly, you're going to come to an understanding and educate yourself greater than just your opinion.
Yeah, and you already know this. I can walk to my breakfast restaurant across the street, and I can point out every person in the restaurant, and I can tell you what political party they vote. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are Democrats. How do I know that? Because I have talked to them, and I have talked to them about their positions, about their beliefs. We have had conversations where we disagree, but you know what? We all respect each other. We honor each other. We realize we're part of a process, and we are so privileged in this country to be able to vote as part of a free society. And so I loved, you said you would cut me out, but let's say it together. Let's always be able to talk from generation to generation.
Hey, if you enjoyed our episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review, because it helps people who don't know about us hear our message. And if you want to follow us on our socials, follow us at G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.